All right, for this last video, we're going to be talking a little bit more in depth about the demand sensitivity setting that is available. This is a really interesting setting. We did touch on it in the last video about dealing with individual date ranges and how it can be used to, potentially pump up the model. This setting, however, is very interesting because of its flexibility. At its root, what it's doing is for any given day, our model is assessing what we think the demand is. If I go over here to the demand sensitivity screen, you can see two charts. We have our actual pricing chart, but we also have this chart showing the demand indexes of every day. So for example, on this date, on this example unit, December 22nd, we have a demand index of 109.7. Every day gets a demand index. This is going to be based on the factors that are described in our model. Our predictive model and our reactive model contribute to the demand index. That means we track bookings to contribute to the demand index. We track how other people are pricing. We also look at how things have acted year over year. Now, this demand index is something that can also change every day. Because we assess demand every day, we do assign a new demand index for each of the days in the future based on what we're seeing up to this point. For you guys, what this means is you have a lot of flexibility to open up the model. The first thing that I want to note when dealing with demand index is that it is a little different than base rate, where base rate will shift the whole line up or down. It's kind of like your starting point for the model. And seasonality will shift individual months up or down. So if I put in here, maybe I want to bring this to 0 in January, really pump it up. You'll notice that both base rate and demand sensitivity, because they come before daily demand, they tend to shift the entire thing proportionally. Now, with demand sensitivity, what you're going to see is that it is primarily going to act on days that have demand. So in this case, which is a very weekend heavy market, if I set this to more aggressive, you'll see that the dates that change are really primarily the weekends. The weekdays will change a little bit. Some of the low demand days will get lower. Some of them will get a little higher. But if I go from more aggressive to more conservative, you'll see that the demand sensitivity is really primarily operating on your peaks. Now, one of the benefits of demand sensitivity is how much flexibility this setting actually has. Let me give you a little background of this example that we've selected. So I've selected an example that's very, very interesting. One is it's in a market that I know well. So that's one. I do understand what's going on here. Two, the Wheelhouse rate plan is similar, but there's quite a few differences to the Wheelhouse rate plan and the rate plan that is actually in the system that the user is using now. The user is using a very, very high rate plan. Now, one thing I might check is just, again, check that last year's bookings to get an idea of where things are actually selling. This one is pretty interesting because this property has been around for a little while. You can see if I take off some of these and just show the Wheelhouse rates, that it's been around for almost a year. The Wheelhouse rate plan is actually very similar to the actualized rates that they're making. However, at some point they raise the rates, or they do hold the rate and occasionally capture it. So that's pretty interesting. For the case of this example, let's say we've decided that we still want to hold high rates further out, but we actually want to let the market price drive the rates closer in, because we know that sometimes this property can actually capture these really high rates, but once that time period has passed, it either ends up being vacant or we have to drop the rate pretty substantially, and we want to automate that. Demand sensitivity ends up being a really interesting place that we can do that. The first thing I'm going to do is set this to rule-based. So first let me set it to recommended, then I'm going to set this to rule-based. Now, with the rule-based option, we basically have a number of things that we can do that are really, really flexible in how we adjust the rate. You will notice that by clicking to rule-based, this demand sensitivity default has defaulted to 0, and that's taken almost all of my differentiation out of the rate plan. So the first thing I'm going to do is just set this back to 100%. Okay. So now I've got the same rate plan that I had when I started. Now, there's a few things I could do. If I open up monthly rules, I could decide, hey, maybe for my high season, March, April, and October, I just want to hold this higher rate plan all the time. Just consistently want the model to push this rate. I'm going to use the same demand trends. So as pricing changes and we see demand in the space, that's all still going to apply. It's just going to be amplified by this setting. You can see here that I put in 200% from the 100% for these 3 months. And now those rates are just permanently higher. Maybe I want it to be a little higher. I really want to try to match as best as I can the rates that I had in the system. Um, Very easy to go in and just adjust this. It's also possible that maybe I also want to do this kind of shoulder season and adjust that as well. Maybe I don't want to go quite as high, but I still want that rate to be higher. So all I have to do is add another rule, and I can adjust the individual months and days of the week. Now, if I just check what this is doing, we can see here that our high rates are high. I've also upped all of these kind of shoulder periods in the fall and spring, but I left the winter where it was. That's one option. Very flexible. Now, to get to a further level of flexibility, what we can do is actually also make this time-based. So remember how earlier I said we really want to keep the rates higher, but we want to allow the rates to drop in the short term. What I could do is add a time-based rule and say maybe after 60 days, I want this rate to be 200%. We know 200% from our last one doesn't quite bring the rate plan up exactly where it was. It's a little bit under. But you can see now, in this period within 60 days, I'm just letting the market rate operate. Then out here, I've stacked that rate up to get to the opportunity to get those higher rate bookings that have been on my system before. Now, I can go a little further. I could even stagger this. Maybe I'm going to be a little bit more conservative and let this be 150. But after 90 days, that's when I want this to really just match the rate plan that I had in the system. So now I have two rules, an after 60 and an after 90. And when I go look at this, you can see that that rate plan now is crawling up. I'm still holding my rates higher. I'm very close to that original rate plan that I had, but I'm trying to be more conservative in this short term so that I can try to capture both the highest rates possible when they're available, but also the most bookings when maybe that rate plan is a little bit too high. I'm still using the Wheelhouse model. I do have days that spike up because Wheelhouse is seeing demand. I'm incorporating the strategy that I built out before I used Wheelhouse, and I'm adding something new. I'm giving myself some automation and flexibility to really deal with these areas that aren't booked. Now let's go one step further. Maybe when I look at these last year's bookings, I'm thinking, hey, maybe I can capture these really high rates in this high season further out, but I'm not so sure about the low season. If I take these off a little bit, let's just give ourselves a little bit more visibility. You'll notice here that there's quite a lot of vacancy in this low season, and the rates are very, very low. In my current plan, I have those rates all pumped up. So if I wanted to go one more step of fine-tuning this, I could specify by month and choose all of the months except for my low season. Let's go take a look at what that does. So now you can see I have that same strategy. This is going to constantly shift through time so that my rates fall down into the short term. I'm keeping my rates high out here, but I know as I get closer that they'll kind of fall down towards the market rate, so I don't have to try to manage those all the time. And then I know I've positioned myself really, really well in this short term. Now, there's one more spot I want to deal with. In our last one, we talked about those individual dates that we might adjust. We can do so on the calendar. We can do so off of mins. Again, we could do so off of demand sensitivity. So maybe January 29th to the 31st. I'm just going to throw that on here. I don't want to affect the whole month because it's really just those days. Otherwise, it's all low season. Let's go ahead and put those in, and we'll just put this at like 400% for now. I'm just going to throw a value in and go up and check it. So you can see I can get pretty close there. Now, I have a very robust strategy. I've incorporated the strategy that I know I've been learning from on my own time, and I've also automated the parts that allow me to capture the most revenue. As you can see, this demand sensitivity is a very complex, but also very robust setting that you can use to configure your rate plan. The final piece that's really helpful about it is because these are percentages that are dealing with an indexed value, it's very, very easy to copy and paste this to other units. So I could go ahead and apply this same strategy to all my other units. I could even come up with a different strategy. Maybe my low performing units, I don't want to bring up that much, and I only want to bring them up a little bit. I could alter my strategy, save it, and then copy that to different groups of units to try different things in my portfolio. Anyway, hope that helps. Bye.